Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every other week to discuss a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. God.
Hey, you two. I have missed you. It's been almost a month since we actually recorded this, and there's nothing going on in the world. There's nothing going on in our lives. I know I got the triple whammy right now of my 11-year-old turned 12. Then you have Halloween. Then you have election and lots of teacher work days. And you know, I can't complain. We've had it's a full of the right kind of activity. But good God, I feel like definitely in the sprinting phase of the fall. How are you two doing? What's going on? Sarah, how are you?
Good. Yeah, I feel the same way. I'm just kind of like from one long thing into like I spent all day Sunday doing the first trunk or treat that St. Bede's has ever had, which like in our previous church, we were just like, this is a neat idea. And then somebody on staff did it. But my goal was for no one on staff to have extra work because the priest's wife has ideas. So yeah, so that was
wise.
Like real, right? Yeah. So that was make friends, not enemies. So that was really exhaustive. It's like it was a whole sort of orchestration, but it was really fun. I put effort into like before I opened it up for people to sign up to host trunks. I sent an email to a list of elderly people, and so it's super, super multi-generational, which I loved.
Sarah.
Yeah, that was.
Did you dress
special.
up? I saw the pictures, at least of Josh. I don't know were you?
Definitely didn't dress up. No, I mean I like ordered.
Didn't have time to put together a costume.
I ordered a sweatshirt from Amazon with a jack-o'-lantern on it, and was like, "Here we go, folks! Like we're rolling." Yeah, and Josh dressed like the previous director, so that was awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
What did that involve? Did he have a distinctive look? The previous.
Well, first of all, hi Sammy, because I know he listens. Blue jeans, short sleeve clergy shirt, tennis shoes, and then he just put. Oh, and he has what's the collar called where you slide it in?
Tab collar. Or
tab
something?
collar.
Yeah.
Tab collar, which Josh randomly had a tab collar shirt. And he put on a name tag that said Father Sammy. So
love Sammy.
Yeah, it was really funny. Yeah, it was really sweet. So and he wore a Yankees hat because Sammy's such a Boston fan. So anyway, it was really good fun.
So had to get a little dig in there.
Just a little, yeah. It was great. Yeah, but I'm tired. You know, yesterday I ran a 6th grade book fair. So yeah, I'm
Super mom.
Super mom in
making
it
happen.
Now.
Well, Rutger, Sarah and I had the privilege of being together in Tyler,
which was awesome.
But how you been? What's the
Yeah.
latest? I mean, I've heard a little bit from you, but tell our listeners
I'm in the same place Sarah is. Like very busy time of year. You know, like Jacob Smith said, if you're just a human being with children, but especially clergy, it just feels like one long sprint until you get to Christmas, you know. So we're like in stewardship season and program season, and stewardship is fundraising, you know, for those of you non-Episcopalians.
Church nerd, yeah.
Yeah. And then we had our diocesan convention this past weekend, and trunk or treat and Sunday, and you know, just and. So I'm a little tired, but you know, it's all actually good stuff. And trunk or treat was wonderful, and actually diocesan convention was amazing. The new presiding bishop at the Episcopal Church, which means nothing to anybody except Episcopalians, was there, and he was fantastic. He was he was really, really great, and got to spend a little time with him.
Wow.
So that was encouraging. And then a wonderful Sunday and a great trunk or treat party, and just trying to figure out how to survive until December 26th. You know, so
yeah.
I feel like I must be the last churchgoer in America who's never planned or even attended a trunk or treat. We don't do them here.
It's made for you, Dave. I
was
mean,
gonna
you
say, I think I would
would
like
be
it.
in your element. You
It's
would love it.
it's not
Yeah.
by design, it's simply by
It's
circumstance.
it's like church Comic-Con. I mean, it's
I'd
just
never
yeah.
heard of it before I moved to Texas. I gotta
Yeah,
say,
yeah,
it was a
yeah,
thing
yeah,
in
yeah.
Texas, but
You
I'd
know,
It
never
is.
heard. Yeah,
it's now that I travel around and lots and lots of places have adopted the trunk or
Yeah.
treat. It's just a big sort
Yeah.
of community event almost, and like
Yeah.
everyone,
Yes.
Totally.
combines a lot of that.
I want it to feel like a block party. That's always my goal. Like I want it
Yes.
to feel like a really fun block party. I want people to feel like they're tailgating. I need no Christian devotionals in the middle of it. No thank you, which I have seen on some churches' signs, and I'm like, lame. I just want it to be fun. So
And
Well,
super easy way for people to invite their friends, right? And kids, and just
100%.
like, hey,
Oh,
come.
yeah.
It'll be fun, and
Yeah.
there'll be free candy, and your
Our
kids can
church
run
is
around.
literally in a neighborhood, so people just walked from their
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
houses. Yeah, it was
It's like a
great.
2-hour play date on a Saturday evening.
hundred
You know?
percent.
the
With hot
ministry of fun,
dogs.
you
Yeah.
guys. The ministry
Yeah.
of fun. I'm
Yeah,
all
bouncy
about it.
houses and cotton
Yes.
candy, and we have a
Yes.
petting zoo, which is a big hit.
Oh, that's
So
awesome.
yeah, it's really fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm such a sucker for candy. It's like it's a truly I
Who doesn't
find,
love candy?
yeah, but I find it almost feels like this is the time, like these weeks of the year, we're constantly, our soup kitchen hands out candy, like our
Mhm.
preschool has candy, my kids are
Mhm.
constantly getting candy, booze,
Oh yeah.
and I'm eating,
Yeah,
I'm
it's too
probably
much.
eating 80% of it. Like I just
Oh
put it
yeah.
out there. Like I
I ate
have
a whole
to,
package of sour straws yesterday because Annie
Ooh.
got them at tutoring.
yeah.
We just take Marshall's candy and then hand it out. Any candy he gets before Halloween gets distributed to the neighborhood on Halloween.
That's
So just
hilarious.
kind of recycle the candy.
I
Well,
think Annie would kill us in our sleep.
Yeah, he doesn't know.
this won't come out till after Halloween, so we hope everyone had a nice holiday. Right now, it always coincides, at least where I am in Virginia, we have the leaves change colors in an incredibly marvelous, sort of really magnificent way, and so it's peak Virginia for what that means to
Virginia
people.
is for lovers.
We're going to start out this week. I got some great stuff to talk about. We're going to begin by talking about vibes. If you've had a conversation with anyone under the age of 30 in the last, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, you've probably heard the word vibes used in a kind of a expansive way. Well, there was a very interesting article in the Hedgehog Review by Kyle Edwards Williams. She said this. She said, vibes is a subject of popular discourse in recent years, especially among millennials and Zoomers. We talk about the vibes of a certain place or event or scene. A restaurant, for example, can have great vibes, a quality that makes it an attractive place to pass the time. On the other hand, a person can give off bad vibes, radiating anxiety, a harsh mood, or something creepy or oddly uncomfortable. But sometimes you meet someone you can vibe with, which offers one of life's greatest gifts, being in the company of someone with whom you are deeply aligned. Vibes, in short, matter, and they never seem to have mattered more. Vibes, Williams traces the sort of etymology of vibes, and it's not something new. It, in fact, came out of the world of jazz. And the vibraphone, which is like a xylophone, and that was you were playing the vibes.
That's so cool. I did not know that.
Yeah, then it was combined with kind of new agey talk in the 50s and vibrations, sending out vibrations into the world. Norman Vincent Peale, though, even the sort of Christian self-help guru, talked about prayer as sending out positive vibrations to God or to other people. But what Williams is interested in asking, what accounts for its current popularity? He theorizes one reason might be the premium we put on experiences, on the curation of experiences. Music is a big part of this, and come to think of it, so are drugs. The convenience of streaming music on smartphones, as well as the ability to create or listen to playlists that convey particular moods, allows us to literally set the vibes for our day, for a party, or just for a task, like writing an essay such as this, or going on a run after work. It seems that the smartphone, through apps such as TikTok and Instagram, also has contributed to a greater sensitivity to how such things as lighting, fashion, vocal affects, and scenery evoke ever more refined feelings and connotations. Today's vibes, then, can't be accounted for without taking into consideration the role of internet culture. One of the things that we're in the lead up to the election right now, and there's lots of talks about vibe shift People feel like the economy is doing terribly, even though certain markers say that it's doing fine. But there's a vibe that you go into Target and you see a $20 bag of candy, and it gives you sort of a different type of vibe. But it shouldn't be surprising what Williams ends with, that if both the meaning of vibes and the reasons why the term has become so popular again are difficult to explain, we reach for vibes when we're trying to explain something that cannot easily be expressed. And Callie herself theorizes that vibes can be an easy way for us to talk about our emotions and intuitions. And as such, how real they are is a different story. I'm a person who, as listeners know, I happen to absolutely love the Beach Boys, and the song "Good Vibrations" is played actually a pretty big role in kind of popularizing vibrations as a way of talking about the feelings you get from people, or even the intuitions you get. Oh, I had a bad vibe about that phone call, that sort of thing. But what about you guys? Vibes? Do you use this in your common parlance? Is it something you hear a lot?
I do think it's one of those things that like you hear it enough, like for me at least. Like I remember it was this like a week ago, Josh and I went to a restaurant and I walked in and like in my head, like full blast, I didn't say it out loud, was like, oh, this place has good vibes. And I was like, oh God, because I don't usually use that word a lot, but it's like everywhere right now.
Hmm.
Neither of you have little girls, but little girls are often in shirts that say, and it's been several years of this, like good vibes only,
Mm.
which is like a big ask for anybody, but especially like a 5-year-old girl. And I mean, it's always like funny to me because you see that on stickers, I'm like good vibes only. I'm like, no, that's not a thing.
Good luck with that.
Good luck with that. Yeah, but it's everywhere. Like didn't pass the vibe check. I hear that kind of constantly,
Yeah.
Yeah.
RJ, does your church give off a good vibe? I mean, I
actually think we do. I mean, I hear all the time when people walk in, they're like, "This place feels warm. It feels welcoming. The people are nice. I feel like I can be myself. I can let my hair down a little bit." But the word "vibes" not used in my context. I'm old. I'm older than you guys. I will say I'm very sensitive to things like lighting and music. We pretty much have, every light bulb of any kind in my church must be either a soft white bulb, or if it has multiple settings, has to be on the softest setting, because there's nothing I hate more than like the daylight, dentist chair, very blue. Just it drives me insane. So I'm very sensitive to that. I don't know that. Yeah, I get it. There's, I think there's pressure in that too, right? You want to be the kind of person who is always sending out good vibes, especially, from the pulpit on Sunday morning. And I don't know. Sometimes there's good vibes. Sometimes there's not good vibes, right? I do think there's something about the Holy Spirit in there too. There's something about sympathetic vibrations. You guys know about sympathetic vibrations, that when you find the resonant pitch of a certain space, it kind of doubles the volume of something, that you can kind of sense when you're tapping into something bigger than yourself, or you're kind of resonating with something larger than yourself. It seems to have more of an impact. But yeah, the whole like good vibes only, that seems like a recipe for disaster, because you have to have a place where you can, put out your bad vibes. Like I was with a bunch of we started a new like young dads Bible study, and we were talking about the parable of I think the Good Samaritan, and sort of about us being the man who's like bleeding and dying. And one of the dads said, yeah, he's like, no one ever wants to hear, people don't want to hear about your weakness. They don't want to hear about that. They only want to hear about your strength. They only want to hear about your success. But then we all went on to talk about, our weakness. So clearly there's a need for a place to talk about that sort of stuff. But I guess in the best sense, that's actually a good vibe, right? A vibe of vulnerability.
A
And not
vulnerability vibe.
Yeah, not a vibe of like pretension.
Well, it's different from
Or,
a vibe of just complaint, though, which is, I think
It is
it is important to have a place where you can
yes.
complain, though. I mean, that's what we do with a lot of our best friends. However, if you're with someone who's only ever complaining, that tends to be a vibe that
kind of a downer
that brings you down.
Yes.
Can we just talk about language for a second? Because that's what's also fascinating to me, is like my parents did not give a shit about like what sort of language I was using, like in terms of like slang. And now because of the internet, we like as especially like women, right, who are on the internet on Instagram a lot, there's this like pressure of like needing to know the words. And what's funny to me is the word, I mean, these words are probably popular with young people like a decade ago,
Mhm.
right? But it's like this weird, I don't know. I'm fascinated by it. Like I have friends who are on the internet a lot and they're my age. And sometimes they say, a lot of times they say things I'm like, either I think that was, I have no idea what you're talking about,
Mhm.
or I think that was so funny. Oh my God, did you come up with that? And they're like, no, it's from the internet. So anyway, it's just the impact that like the internet has had on language is like endlessly interesting to me.
And there's always been like, someone always forwards me this. There's this dad on Instagram. He's constantly taking videos of himself with his daughters in the car, and he's using all of the
Oh
sort of
yeah.
most
It's so good.
contemporary
Yeah.
slang and embarrassing
Yeah.
them so much
Yeah.
that they're like, I can't hit. Don't say the word cap. Don't say the word skibbity. Don't say
Yeah.
all of these things
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
mark you and
Yeah.
vibes. It is
Yeah.
very,
I
very
miss my
funny.
teenage children.
Annie told me the other day, she's like, yeah, the kids who eat too much in the cafeteria, everybody calls them big back. And I was like, what? And she's like, that's what we call fat people. I was like, oh my God. And then I couldn't stop laughing. And then I felt like the worst mom ever. I was like, big back? That's
Oh my gosh.
terrible.
She's
My-
going to get kicked out of school.
I know. I was like, I should have been like, we don't call people that. And I was a little bit at the end after I stopped laughing for 3 minutes, you know? So, yeah.
It is a moving target. What is interesting to me a little bit about the vibes talk, Tara Burton had an incredible article about how Silicon Valley has kind of gone woo, which is sort of a new way for saying new age. I don't forget if we talked about it on here. She talked about rational magic, and she said that the sort of current generations are much more comfortable. We used to have this sort of, what would you call it, radical atheist view of the world that was sort of infringing and people viewed themselves as so rational. But now there's a much more accepted, you talk about juju, you talk about vibes all the time.
Yeah.
There's much more accepted sort of language around, I guess, almost supernatural but spiritual realities in what she calls a woo way, because it's very vague and it's a little heterodox. It's sort of meant to be kind of witchy almost, but that you see
like,
that
it's giving Lilith fair.
Yeah,
you know, like
you
it's so
see
interesting.
that in these apparently like in these techno bubbles,
right?
Spotify will curate automatically playlists around certain vibes for you if you and they're like very specific vibes, and it's very interesting to me that we can talk about spiritual realities in that way, but the moment we want to talk about the Holy Spirit or anything that smacks of, I guess, traditional language around, people balk, or maybe it's an entry point. I don't know, but what do you think, Arch?
Well, two things. I don't find people balking about talk of the Holy Spirit. And I also think, we live in an age where, rational argument and facts and headiness, it just doesn't matter at all. Like, all that matters is feelings, even coming into the, I don't really want to talk about the election, but 5 days from the election, it's like, okay, what's your vibe? Like which direction, which direction are you headed? So emotions are what matter. And I think that's important in our line of work. Like, no one has been rationally argued or reasoned with into a life-altering position ever in the history of the world, and certainly not in the last 10 years.
Certainly. Yeah. It's very interesting. I mean, let's move on to the next thing, which has to do with a vibe that's been a little bit misattributed. This is by Matt Alt in Eon, who wrote about the joy of clutter. Now, Matt is a journalist who lives in Japan, which has been seen traditionally as a paragon of minimalism. Now, if you watched, Shogun recently, or simply indulged in the sort of Marie Kondo vein of things before that, I guess, imploded. But you know what we're talking about here. He writes a fascinating essay here. He says, "It has been 2 decades since Japan's tidying boom began, and the nation remains as cluttered as ever. I know this because I live here. I've seen it with my own eyes in the cities and countryside, in businesses and residences. I see it in my own home in Tokyo, typing these words from a room in which stuff relentlessly accumulates no matter how many times I clean up. Yet I don't feel oppressed by my clutter because it is clutter with which I've chosen to surround myself. My clutter is me. But then he says, I love the elegant simplicity of Buddhist gardens and Shinto shrines and tea houses. I love austere modernist architecture and product design. Yet these things have always struck me more as virtual constructs than realities. They are to be experienced in brief sojourns rather than to be lived in, like bathing in otherworldliness before returning to the humdrum reality of one's ordinary life. Alt interviews the author of the 1993 photo book Tokyo Style, which is Kyoichi Tsuki, who helped document the clutter of Japan for posterity. And by the way, if you've ever been to a Japanese toy store, and I'm a person who likes that sort of thing, there's stuff everywhere. Or a candy store. It's just total wall to wall stuff. This is what Tsuki told Alt. He said, cluttered spaces reflect the lifestyles of their occupants. Minimalism, on the other hand, is a way of establishing privacy. You can't tell what that person wears or eats. Tsuki continues, clutter isn't really an East versus West thing. It's a rich versus poor thing. Wherever you go, anywhere in the world, the wealthy have the luxury of living in clean, minimal spaces, while the poor have to make
Yep.
do with small, cramped ones without any way to hide their belongings. Now, Brian Jarrell, who was writing about this for Mockingbird, he wrote this. He said, Tsuki's insight that minimalism is ultimately about privacy is incredibly helpful. The desire to declutter is ultimately the desire to avoid judgment, whether it's the guilt of our own consumerism or the condemning eye of a visitor. And the truth is, we all judge people based on the knickknacks on their counter, the stuff they have laying around. Who wouldn't want to be free from that judgment, whether it's judgment from outsiders or from our own self-loathing? Say what you will about Aunt Linda's Precious Moments figurines, but at least she's comfortable enough in her own skin to let others in on her life and passions. Now, clutter is a constant in my life, and I people who watch the video of this know that I've got a huge shrine of cluttery stuff behind me. But I also notice that when we have people over to the house, it's not just that you straighten up, it's that you hide clutter. Like, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to minimize clutter. And in part, I've recognized what Brian's saying. It's a privacy thing, but it's also an aesthetic thing and a beauty thing, but it is a judgment thing. You want to be, because when I go into a person's house and it's super cluttered, I can't really shut down the internal monologue that is taking everything in, but also probably being judgmental. But this is very interesting to me because Japan really is seen, along with maybe Sweden, as like this bastion of minimalism. And he's just trying to say that is a facade largely of privilege and of artistry, and that the reality of people's lives, if you want to get to know a person, in fact, you need to kind of know what their clutter is. And it is a form of, RJ, of vulnerability and sometimes pathology. I mean, if you've ever watched the show, Hoarders, you know that it can be a legit mental illness when you're being swallowed up by your clutter. I don't know. This struck me as a very interesting thing about clutter, judgment, reality versus curation. What are the vibes you're sending out in your space, et cetera, et cetera? Anything occur to you when I talk about this?
I first of all wondered if he was married or not, because we tend to be comfortable with our own clutter, but not comfortable with other people's clutter, including our spouse's clutter. We can have our own little pile, but you better not have your pile because you gotta hide that away. And then it made me think of, friends I have who, when you go over to their house, yes, everything looks perfect and in its place. And you're just like, oh God, and you feel sort of jealous and insecure. But then open any drawer, in the house, and you'll just see tons of all the clutter has just been stuffed into a drawer temporarily, and it's all going to come back out, once the party is over. So it's just is the clutter visible or hidden? It's there no matter what. But yeah, to what degree have you been able to sort of integrate that reality into your life, or to what degree are you trying to hide it? Yeah.
Sarah, you got
I
any
mean, I
clutter?
think we always talk about, I'm the firstborn daughter of two people who died. Yeah, I have a lot of shit. I love how we always talk about people who are hoarders, but we don't talk about I don't know if I know of I'm thinking of one family specifically not from this church, so don't worry if you're listening, but from a previous one who was pretty manic Like their kids' beds had to be made every night. Like they were always donating stuff. They were always getting rid of it. And that felt really crazy to me. And like these spaces that are really clear, I think I get the aesthetic's not for me. So I just want to say that. Like I don't look at like the clear, clean, neutral spaces and think like, wow, I'm jealous. I think, wow, I could get a tooth pulled in here. So it's I don't like, yes, we have a lot of stuff, but it doesn't bother me at all. But also like we have a lot of privilege, so I can look at my stuff and be like, this can be shoved into a closet. This can be put out so people think we actually read the New Yorker. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, that's this irony, because you think if you have less money, you will have less stuff.
Right, but that's
what
not
it really
true.
means, you just have less space to put your stuff,
the
because
stuff.
Right.
you are going to accumulate things as part of. We're watching. We have a neighbor who died after being on hospice for years, and her children, they're in their 60s. Her son and daughter are there, and they're clearing out the stuff. It's a journey into a person's inner space and their sort of internal space, but it's also a journey into the past, and it's just a huge burden for these kids. And I just watch as that's the only thing they want to talk to me about. They didn't want to talk about their sadness or their grief, because they really want to say, do you want any of this stuff we have?
Well,
Because
they can't get to it yet. I mean, that was definitely my experience. Like, you can't even get to the sadness or the grief because there's like so much physical contents in front of you. Yeah.
and maybe
If
it's
you're
just
old and you haven't started clearing out your stuff, clear out your stuff. I hear
this is
so many old
something-
people who are always like, "Oh, my kids will take care of it." I'm like, no, don't do that.
My parents feel very, very strongly about this, because they've not only downsized a few times, but they've had to do it for both of their parents, and they think like, well, gosh, what we wouldn't have given for there to be a little less stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
But I find it fascinating, this whole thing, because I mean, physical clutter can become mental clutter. If you've ever walked into
Sure.
a person's, the offices in our office building for our church, the degree of clutter says something about everyone. And the fact that my office is the most cluttered definitely says something about not just my personality, but at certain times it says a lot about my mental health, and that is something I'm not necessarily comfortable with everyone seeing. But I also think that the idea that you can just straighten up your room and it straightens up your mind, I mean, or your spirit, that's just not true. That's an outside in kind of approach to it. This is one of the reasons this struck me, this article, is because our friend Matt Popovich just released a book called Junk Drawer Jesus, and it's about people's sort of spiritual junk drawer. And the junk drawer you open up, and our faith is made up of all these various ephemera that we collect over the years. And it's a very effective way of talking about the faith, actually, and it's helped me sort of think about that. But if you think about the spiritual clutter of our lives, or the mental, emotional clutter of our life, then this next article is for you. Sarah, you sent this, and what an article it is. The title alone may get people having all sorts of vibe shifts. This is from Simone Ellen on BuzzFeed. I tracked down the girls who bullied me as a kid. Here's what they had to say.
So good.
This is Simone. She's referred to as Simone a bunch in this article. She says that one day in 2019, while she was procrastinating at work, she started thinking about a girl who had rejected her in 7th grade. The rejection still stung whenever I thought about it, she writes. Suddenly I had an idea. Why not interview my former classmates from middle and high school? Not only the people who bullied me, but all of my female peers, about their experiences with the social scene when we were growing up in our Westchester, New York town. Now, just spoiler alert, I grew up in Westchester, New York, so a lot of this.
I'm dying to know where she grew up.
I immediately think
Yeah.
about, this is the same context I grew up in.
Yeah.
And I think of this. I think I actually know the school she's talking about. However, this is what she says. Sometimes individuals bully others because someone is bullying them. That was certainly the case with one former classmate I contacted who had relentlessly tormented me during middle school. At first, she was reluctant to talk. She ignored my initial Facebook message, but when I followed up, she called me. I'm so sorry, she said repeatedly during our call. I swear I'm not a bad person. I think about what I did to you all the time. I don't know why I chose you. I had a miserable home life. She revealed some of the trauma she'd been through. And while I had guessed that it might have been the case, hearing it from her own lips made all the difference, Simone writes. I was finally able to forgive her, and I hope to help her forgive herself. Continuing on, she says, I was surprised to learn that many of the quote unquote popular girls paid a steep price for maintaining their social standing. As one former cheerleader told me, the girls in her clique were so mean to each other that she grew up distrusting other women. I didn't have a real female friend until I was 43, she told me.
Wow.
My conversations with my classmates confirmed that many of the girls who appeared to have their lives together and even be thriving struggled just like the rest of us. The one woman that Simone had thought of as the prettiest, most athletic, and well-liked in her class told her this, that I, quote, always felt like an outcast, like a little brown mouse. I'll never forget the 7th grade dance. I was really excited about my outfit. I remember walking in and seeing this group of girls looking me up and down and giggling. It seemed like the whole dance stopped, and I realized how mismatched I was. I thought, I am really uncool. I went to the bathroom and cried. Then I called my mother, and she came and picked me up. To this day, I still feel like I can't put clothes together. This is where Simone comes to with this incredible article. She says, as I continued the project, I unexpectedly found myself reflecting on my own behavior during those years. I realized there were times when I chose to feel like a victim. I know there were classmates who admired my musical talent, who thought I was pretty and kind, but in some instances, I was too preoccupied with my own victimhood to recognize their affection. I was also forced to admit that I wasn't always kind to others. I certainly gossiped about others and shunned classmates who I worried might threaten my own tenuous social status. This project has finally given me the opportunity to forgive the women who rejected and tormented me. After decades of hurt and resentment, I now see them as they were, young girls experiencing their own trials and tribulations, some common to many of us, others more painful than I can imagine. Perhaps most importantly, the experience of reconnecting with these women has helped to diminish years of insecurity and shame. I left out a bunch of stuff that people should read the whole article. But Sarah, you sent this, and I want to know what was on your mind when you sent it, or what it made you think of.
I didn't really bully that much. I think I got bullied a lot more, especially middle school. Middle school is just so hard. I mean, I just feel like no one gets out alive, especially girls. I just feel like no one gets out alive. And now that we've got a middle school girl, it's like, oh my God, this is really, really, really hard. I did think about some of the girls who were mean to me. There's one I always think about who, like, her and her whole little crew, like, kind of beat me and a friend up on the playground. I mean, Mississippi Public School ain't nobody paying attention. And how she was like, gave a tremendous amount of money to us when Hurricane Harvey hit, to our church.
Wow.
Yeah, just like out of nowhere. This felt really like reverse redemption. It felt really beautiful that this woman who had been the target could like reach back. I don't feel like I really have people that were that horrible that I feel like I need to, like, I don't carry it now, but I certainly see how somebody could. So.
Yeah. I mean, I know the Westchester, New York context, and I think that there's definitely a Mean Girls, it could have that movie could have been made about any number of high schools, but it certainly could have been made about that area of the country. I think about like several different things here, Sarah. I think about, I do remember like last year when there was that meme going around about how it turns out all men are secretly thinking about the Roman Empire. I mean, that doesn't happen to be for me, but like some girlfriends were sort of saying, it turns out I asked my boyfriend, does he think about the Roman Empire? And he said, yeah, every day. And that just blew his mind. And there was the attempt to find what the female equivalent of it was. Yeah. And the female equivalent that someone came up with was like asking his girlfriend, a guy asking his girlfriend, do you ever think about your ex-best friend? And she's like, every day. I think about my ex-best friend constantly. And my experience of being married to a woman is that that is accurate, that
totally
there's a lot of that going on, and a lot of sort of the checking out on social media what's happening in a way that, I mean, I don't know if it's it feels like a sort of a strange gender divide that I don't quite know what to make of. But I also think of my dad, who wrote the book about peace in the last third of life. And he talks about how the first third of life is basically up until about age 25. And that's when most of the action in the deep stuff of your life happens. And then there's the second third of life where you're striving and you're proving and you're providing and doing all this stuff. And it basically becomes a blur. And then the third third of life is where you're really just reconciling what happened in the first third of life and kind of thinking about it and kind of coming to terms with it. And what she is talking about, Simone, is what the deep, deep scarring that happens in the first third of life, and how people are these relationships were still very present tense to almost everyone she spoke to, and they could summon them. And I think that that's true no matter who you are. I think that's true for men just as much. There was a moment like there, and then RJ, I'd love to hear from you. But there is a moment where she does read one sort of beautiful story, because she's not, it's not all one dimensional. She talks about athletes and how athletes often dodged some of this stuff because they had an external source of sort of self-regard through their athleticism. She said, one athlete shared a touching story about being a team captain in gym class. She recalled how when picking teams, one girl in our grade was always chosen last. The woman said, one day, I don't know why, I decided to pick that girl first. When I look back, I can still see the smile on her face 40 years later. It changed me that day. It made me realize that winning wasn't the most important. And so it's not all the bad stuff that happens to us during those years. However, it is deeply scarring. And I also was, by the way, very struck by what Simone says about having to come to terms with the fact that it turns out she wasn't totally the victim here too. There were plenty of women that she talks to other women who just felt invisible, that they weren't bullied, but they just weren't even regarded. Right. And she's kind of having to come to terms with the fact that she's crafted her own narratives here. And I think there's something repentant about that in a very healing kind of way.
I think knowing like that we fall into all three of those categories often is really like that we are all invisible in some context. And I think about, there were girls that I was really mean to. There were girls that were really mean to me. And then I will forever remember getting a job as a waitress in Oxford, Mississippi when I was in college. And, I peaked in college. That was the hottest I ever was. I'll never be that hot again. But I was back there waitressing, and there was all these guys that were like really popular that I went to school with that were working back in the kitchen. And they were like, so where are you from? Like, they had no idea who I was. You know what I mean? And then they were like, oh my God, I can't believe we went to school together. And I was like, well, 2 years did me good. But it's just like, it's such a weird, like, we're so in our heads. And you guys definitely, it's not just girls. You see this in middle school. They're so in their heads. It's just so much anxiety and pressure and fear. And, it's hard.
Well, RJ, you grew up in the same part of the country, and clearly you were bullied a lot. But
there's a reason I went to Berkeley. There's a reason I was like, I'm done with
out of here.
I'm done with this context, with kind of small Connecticut, homogenous, whatever. I'm going as far away as I can in every way possible. Yeah, not bullied. I was just kind of done with that culture. But this made me think of my wife was watching, and I caught a little bit of it, that Demi Lovato documentary on Hulu about kind of child stars and the impact, where she goes around and interviews a lot of people who are now adults who became famous when they were children, and just the unbelievable toll that it took on them. Who had everything you could ever possibly want, all the fame, all the money, all the regard, all the success. And it destroyed their lives, and they're kind of putting the pieces back together again. But some of that was her also really beautifully apologizing, for some of the things that she had done, which she was not proud of, some of which was product of the pressure that she was under and the dysfunction that she was suffering. And she was also like, a teenager. She's not that old now, but she was younger then. So some really kind of amazing conversations with, Drew Barrymore, and some of her Mickey Mouse, club comrades and other kind of child stars. So, yeah, again, it's the arrival fallacy, right? Like, we think we know what's going to make us happy, and then we get there, and surprise, surprise, it ruins your life. The other thing, I was thinking about Almost Famous recently, because I was using a part of that in my recent sermon. And the Philip Seymour Hoffman character says something to the young Cameron Crowe. He says, the only true currency in this world is kind of what you do, what you say when you're uncool, when you're
Mm,
and there's
that's
something
so
really, it's
good.
really, really good, right? Because it comes at the moment where where the young Cameron Crowe is trying to figure out what to write about the band, and he likes them, and he thinks they're his friends, and they want him to make them look cool in Rolling Stone, and and Lester Bangs is like, that's not real. The only real thing is what you do and what happens when you're not cool. And there's freedom. There's freedom
Yeah.
in not being cool. And if I'm to be honest, I think a lot of I went to 3 different high schools, but the third high school I went to, which I really didn't like, probably a lot of my unhappiness was self-inflicted because I really wanted to be cool.
Mm.
I'd been cool at my second high school, and then I showed my third, and I still thought I was cool, and they were like, "Who the hell? Who are you? We don't care about
Mhm.
you." And if I had just embraced being uncool, I probably would have had a lot more fun. Yeah.
Well, you get to
Yeah.
embrace. You've clearly embraced it in your adult
You
life.
have.
I
You've
have that
yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
That's right. I don't
yeah,
care any more about success or public
yeah,
image or putting out good vibes at all. I'm
yeah.
just a disaster all the time, and it's working for me.
So
Someone tell
this
Melania, right?
this
Mm.
is I know,
Yes. Oh
right?
my God. Thank you for that. By the way, Sarah, I've gotten a lot
Hello.
of text
Hello.
messages.
Good.
Thank you for that. That was
Good.
deeply edifying. Yeah.
I mean, this episode's going to be so long, but I have to just give a little shout out right now to the book, The Great Unknown, that's just come out by Riley Keough and Lisa Marie Presley post death, because there's a lot of this sort of idea in there, but for mothers and daughters or for
Mm.
family relationships, where it's like, we've got what sort of Lisa Marie is saying as Elvis's daughter, and then how Riley Keough is like, oh, this is why my mom is this way, right? This is why she was this way to us, and this is where all this sort of hurt came from. It's such a beautiful understanding. But anyway, like my Roman Empire is Elvis, so that's why I'm talking
Yeah.
about it.
Well, we share that a little bit.
Yeah.
The understanding does help, and the fact that everyone had their own
Yes.
terrible experiences they were working through, but there were still people that you still there's a forgiveness aspect of like not everyone is just still really really cruel to other people in those moments, or sometimes I mean I think it's part of the process of healing and it's part of the process of forgiveness, and yet she doesn't sort of let it off the hook. Like you can still learn these things about other people and still have, hey, but it still scarred me, like and
And it's still like, I just have to say it. Maybe this is just because I'm like from trashy ass Mississippi and you guys are like Yankees. But like, I just remember like 5 years ago, two of the girls who were always like either really close or horrible to each other. Like, one of them put up a picture because her daughter had a Frozen birthday and she'd paid somebody to show up in an Elsa outfit. And literally the other woman wrote, full grown woman in her 30s, right underneath, fake ass Elsa.
Still at it.
So
Well, let's shift into something a little bit more, I guess, vertical. This is Will McDavid, wonderful Will McDavid, who used to work for Mockingbird, is now writing for Mockingbird again. My dear friend and colleague, he wrote a fantastic piece on the Mockingbird website called Bridesmaids Revisited. Not Bridesmaid, Bridesmaids Revisited. And he writes this, he says, the fears of most Americans today are very different from the fears of those who lived before the age of antibiotics and electricity and refrigeration. As of even the late 1800s, if a bad summer fever broke out in London, in almost every family, there was a significant chance of someone becoming critically ill. Nature threatened a dozen calamities in any given month. Will writes, the difference between back then and now is that the old problems of nature have been largely tamed by human devices. In day-to-day life, we control much more of our lives than the average medieval person did. But we are still fundamentally finite and susceptible to forces bigger than ourselves. One of the roots of modern anxiety is the knowledge that deep down we can't possibly master everything life throws at us with the resources we have. Then he makes the pivot to the parable of the 10 bridesmaids in Matthew 25. If you don't know about this parable, it's about 10 bridesmaids who all fall asleep on the cusp of the wedding where they're supposed to be present. Will writes, falling asleep without wanting to is among the deepest symbols of human powerlessness. It's a failure of both body and will. It means you've reached the very limit of your capacity such that you cannot do a single thing more. All your energy is spent. These limits are a universal human condition. The text, Jesus talks about how 5 of them are wise and 5 of them are foolish. But even the 5 wise bridesmaids conk out and have to be woken up by a loud shout. The 5 foolish bridesmaids had even bigger problems. They forgot to purchase oil. They failed to think ahead or simply forgot. The message of the parable seems to be harsh. These 5 bridesmaids had checked 99% of the boxes, but for forgetting one little thing and one momentary lapse of diligence, they're locked out of the feast forever. It's easy to read the parable that way because it comports with our own tightly wound world of action and consequence. You get along in the modern world by exercising control and taking care of every little thing.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Just that we read the Bible because of who we are and what era we're in. And that's really such a beautiful insight.
And here he
Yeah.
goes with the denouement. But on a closer reading, the 5 bridesmaids weren't excluded because they forgot their oil. Instead, they were excluded because they were away buying oil when the groom showed up. Imagine a modern wedding. Half the bridesmaids forgot to get their hair done and ran off to the hairdressers as the grandparents were being seated. Come as you are, we would want to tell them. If they made you one of their bridesmaids, obviously they'd love to have you there, even if imperfectly coiffed. In the parable, the 5 foolish bridesmaids' main problem isn't a failure to perfectly prepare for the wedding. It's becoming so focused on their own perfect preparation that they miss the wedding altogether. Showing up without oil is the only way they can show up at all. The parable never says whether the couple would have forgiven the 5 bridesmaids if they'd stayed there, lamps out, looking bashful, but it's a pretty good bet they would have. At the weddings I've been to, people show up all the time with the wrong kind of shoes, bow tie askew, in low spirits for some personal reason, hungover, hair sticking up, or having given a toast at the rehearsal dinner that deeply offended the mother of the groom. And every time they've been welcomed with open arms. If our earthly brides and grooms know how to welcome imperfect guests, how much more does Jesus invite them into the party? It's not your burning lamp they want at the reception. It's you. I just love to hear a parable of Jesus unpacked in a way that is so clearly true and also radical and also slightly at odds with the instinctual reading, and the instinctual reading is always control and judgment, no matter medieval or now. And here you have Will, I think, getting at something that is true and is
I love
deeper.
it. I mean, it's why, side note, it's why when you have a really hard text, especially if you're an Episcopal priest, you need to not do the obvious thing and you need to preach it. You don't need to get out of it by trying to preach the epistle. You just need to go head on and figure out what this is really saying. And I don't think we're all Will, but but I mean, what a gift. That's such a beautiful. Jesus is always about the thing under the thing, and I think Will has found one of those.
Yeah.
It's also kind of the only possible interpretation of that parable that's at all gracious. Because the other interpretation is you better have the oil. You better be ready. You better have everything together that you need, or you're not going to get in. So actually, the new presiding bishop preached on this passage at our little thing this past weekend, and it was amazing, And he said at some point, he said to everyone, "Okay, I'm going to say something, and you give me your response." He said, "Don't just stand there." And everyone said what they say. What did they say? They said, "Do something."
Do something.
And he said the message of this parable is don't do something, just stand there. Just
come
trust.
on now.
Exactly. You hear him saying?
On.
He's like, the message of this parable is trust the goodness and the grace of Jesus enough to just stay where you are and wait for him to show up and not think that you bring anything to the table. And I was like, effing men, yes, please. That's the message of this
Don't
parable,
just do something. That's straight out of the rooms of recovery. I love it. Hands
That's
off,
so
pays
good.
off.
Yeah.
Don't just do something, stand there. Yeah. So good.
Wow. And I mean, if you've also, the wise bridesmaids fall asleep too. I mean, it's not like there's a gradation here that is only on the surface. It's like everyone passes out and no one's really prepared. Even if they have their oil, it's more their own perception of well, of course they wouldn't I wouldn't be
Who would
allowed in
want
if
me
I
to be
didn't
there?
have
Yeah.
the oil.
Yeah.
And we forget that, I was just at a wedding recently where the bride was projectile vomiting 10 minutes before she had to go down the aisle.
Nice.
And let me tell you, no one knew except for me and the wedding planner. And it was somehow she walked down that aisle and the love of the people there, and she also she somehow did, pull it together in some way. But the reality was that she was totally unprepared, and
Mm.
yet people didn't care one bit. And in fact,
No.
all she got was imputed love and affection. And it ended up being an extremely fun wedding. I think she probably had to take like an IV afterwards because she was so depleted from
Oh
I've never
gosh.
seen something like this happen. Like, where is she again? Oh my goodness. Is that really true? Food poisoning. Watch out there, ladies and gents.
Yeah. It actually keeps making me think of how sometimes at night, so I'm definitely like the one who makes sure everybody takes their vitamins, pulls all the stuff out at night. And I kind of have the thing a lot of wives have where it's like, I mean, I don't want your emails, send them to Dave, but like, I'm better at this than my husband is, so I'm just going to do it. And it's there, but I am the parent that falls asleep in front of the television. So like we're all sitting there, catching a Bob's Burgers, and I'm the one that just head back, just totally asleep. And I usually am so anxious while I'm napping, of like, oh, I've got to get up and I'm gonna have to get him downstairs and I've got to get him the medicine, and like some resentfulness can come, like it can be this whole thing. And then like 9 times out of 10, I'll just hear Josh, do not wake your mother up. Just like moving them around me.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
it's just such a funny, I love this idea is so beautiful about like we don't even have any control over like falling asleep. Like it's just a beautiful idea. Good job, Will.
Whenever you get into Christian circles where people are constantly talking about progressive sanctification, and I don't
Oh,
mean that in a
yeah.
political sense, I mean the fact that people are getting better and better through their efforts at following Jesus, you always wonder, well, what if their dream life is terrible? Like what if, think about how are they acting when they're uncool or / when they're unconscious? What's going on at that
Open
point?
up the drawers of their life.
Open up the
Right.
drawers. Like that's what we're really, that's where I think God is to be found.
Yeah.
We're going to close though with something even more beautiful. I think this is from Karen Swallow Pryor, who has a wonderful newsletter. If people know, she's a sort of fairly well-known author and kind of English professor, and she's got a Substack called The Priory, and she wrote a meditation on George Herbert's poem Easter Wings. Now, if people know George Herbert, incredibly, monumental Christian English poet, and he wrote some shape poems that you have to sort of see printed out because they actually take the shape of like wings. But so we'll leave a link to sort of where you can look at that. But this is what Karen Swallow Pryor wrote about this poem, because the poem has a stanza. It's a prayer. It's a short poem. And she's trying to figure out what it was that Herbert was trying to communicate with his one phrase, which is directed at God. Oh, let me rise as larks harmoniously and sing this day thy victories. Then shall the fall further the flight in me. This phrase, then shall the fall further the flight in me. Karen writes, the fall refers to the fall of humanity through sin. But notice that the poem says that it is the fall that will, quote, further the flight in me. How can we fly higher because of the very thing that brought us down? This is an allusion to the doctrine of the quote-unquote fortunate fall. It expresses the idea, and one that John Milton also illustrates in Paradise Lost, that our fall is happy because being saved by Christ's death is better for us and for God's own glory than our condition before the fall. Redemption, Pryor writes, redemption is better than perfection. Sit on that thought for a moment, because I think many of us hardly believe that or don't believe it at all. We would rather be perfect, independent, not in need or reliant on salvation and redemption, wouldn't we? But the doctrine of the fortunate fall says otherwise. It says that being glorified by Christ is better than not having ever fallen at all. Redemption is better than perfection. I think that is a very powerful Christian insight. And it is the lost sheep that returns to the fold is more filled with gratitude and joy than had they never strayed at all. Redemption, there's nothing so broken that God cannot redeem it. God is not in the business of perfection, but in the business of redemption. That's what struck me powerfully this week and always. But yeah, it's maybe, I don't think it's just a vibe. I think it's really the heart of the Christian message. What do you think when you hear the phrase redemption is better than perfection?
I mean, I think like sometimes when I'm in our house and I'm thinking like, oh my God, there's so much shit everywhere. I think, but this is what a house looks like. That's always like a really calming sort of thought to me. Like, and it's similar. It's like, but this is what a sinner looks like,
Mm.
you know, like we want perfection for ourselves and we want to do the right thing and we want to be, you know, like it's like now these days it feels like even so much worse than just we want to do the right thing, because it's also like, and you want to look really good while doing it, you know, like it's all this sort of pressure, and it's like, but this is what a sinner looks like. Like, you know, this is what a house looks like this is the reality that we're in, and how much sweeter to just name our fallenness than to try to like climb up. And I have something else I want to say, but I want RJ to talk. RJ, what are you thinking?
Yeah, that it makes me think of the garden, and that the temptation of the serpent is you can be cool. You know, eat this fruit and you'll be cool, and you'll know things, and you'll be in control, and you'll have everything that you think you want. And then we get it, and we find out that it's awful.
Yeah.
You know, that coolness is not what it's cracked up to be, that it's actually incredibly lonely. And that real joy and real connection and real freedom is to be found in being uncool, admitting that we're uncool. And it makes me think what Will said. You know, I loved his piece. I'm not sure if I agree with what he said in the beginning about life being easier now than it used to be. I think it's easier physically, but I don't know, because I didn't live. I've only lived in this time. But what I know about this time is that, and we talk about this a lot, is that it is a desperately lonely, despairing time. And I have a tough time believing that as many people were depressed or anxious or contemplating suicide hundreds of years ago as they are now. Like, they may have been dealing with physical needs, death, illness, oppression, whatever. At least they seem to be doing it together. You know, it reminds me what my friend Casey Downing, who spent a year in India, said with International Justice Mission. I've said this before, and he saw awful things. He said, I've seen things like I never could have imagined, you know, just suffering. But I also experienced a depth of community and love among people that I've never experienced before. That doesn't, he thinks, you know, doesn't exist in sort of modern 21st century America, because we're obsessed with being cool and having it all.
And perfect.
You know?
We're obsessed with
perfect.
Or at least curating the illusion of perfection.
Yes. And it's desperately lonely.
Yeah.
So and I agree with you. Like, it is a wonderful thing to gather with a bunch of people and talk about all the ways that you're not cool. You know, I think it's why more and more I actually really enjoy being around pastors. Because if you're around a good bunch of pastors and they can actually talk about what their lives are actually like and what's actually going on, it is so deeply hopeful, because you'll encounter a bunch of people who are like in the trenches, telling the truth. It's hard, and are seeing God show up all over the place. And there's real joy in that. You know, that was the biggest gift of the Iowa Preachers Project for me, David Saul, was just hanging out with a bunch of pastors who are doing their best and, you know, seeing God show up in the midst of life's insanity.
Yeah.
And weren't terribly invested in being cool.
Well, these days, if you want to be a pastor, unless you're going the hugely mega church route, there's no, the cool boat has the ship has sailed.
Right. You've missed the cool.
Sailed.
You've missed the boat.
Yeah. I do.
No cachet. Right.
Before I say the other thing I want to say, now I'm going to be catty. One time I was at a clergy thing and I sat down at this table and this dude sat down next to me and he pulled out a full on like inkwell and like a feather pen. And I was like, we're not going to be friends. Like I was immediately just like the level of like the leather
Or
covered.
we'll be best friends.
No,
It's one of the. It's
I was like, you put way too much energy into this moment. Like I've still got egg in my teeth from breakfast, you know. Yeah. So the other thing this made me think of is the height of God because of the fallenness, right? Just the sheer physics of that and how we don't really talk about it and how beautiful it is, right? Because we're such literalists now, we know too much. Also see the anxiety of our modern era, and so we're like, well, God's not up there, and we miss the theological beauty of that. So we've got All Saints at church on Sunday night, the service, and I'm the world's worst soprano in the choir, but it's such a gift to get to be in it. And not many things get through the Lexapro barrier. But there's this song we're singing. It's based on a poem by Alfred Noyes. Am I saying his name right? Noyes, Noyes. Anyway, it's called Let My Love Be Heard. Let me pull it up. Okay. Angels, where you soar up to God's own light, take my own lost bird on your hearts tonight. And as grief once more mounts to heaven and sings, let my love be heard, whispering in your wings. So beautiful. So anyway, I appreciate the idea of God's greatness and God's height and our lowliness and our lack of control and our fallenness and our houses just as they are. So,
well, there's nowhere to go from there. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, RJ. So good to be with the two of you. And thanks for being uncool with me. And
yeah.
I guess we will talk again in a couple weeks, but I hope you have a great next few weeks, and I hope the world
Happy
survives.
election week.
Happy election week, folks.
Enjoy.
Here we go. All right.
Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by TJ Hester. And if you like what you've heard, please drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating or review. Until next time.